So without any further ado, let's move on to the next panel, which is deploying large language models, GPT and hybrid AI, mitigating risk and increasing business value. My guests on this panel are Tom Allen, who's the founder at the AI Journal, and Walt Mayo, who is the CEO at expert.ai. Tom and Walt, welcome on to Tech Live Virtual.
Yeah, great to be here and fun to be back with Walt to have another great engaging conversation today. So looking at a lot of fun with who we've got joining us from around the world.
Fantastic.
Good afternoon, Marcus and Tom. Looking forward to it.
Good afternoon, both. Yeah, looking forward to this conversation. We'll get straight into it. So for you both, what are the key trends and innovations that are driving the transformation of data and the analytics industries? Excuse me. Live events, and how are organizations adopting and adapting these changes to their specific domains? I don't know which one of you would like to get started. Tom, perhaps.
Yeah, I can definitely drive in, but there's a few conversations here that I'd be directing specifically to Walt because I really want to get his insight and angles. But I mean, look, to start with, I'm going to say it's great to be here for this fantastic event and seeing that there's people joining from brands such as Stable Logic, TCS, GSK, the NHS. It's really exciting, right, to have this conversation and to be building what we're doing and helping them with their digital transformation journey. So looking at what you said exactly, I mean, and me and Walt had a really engaging conversation. We've had many in the past as well on what's happening at the moment, because there's a lot I'm learning about at the moment. As Walt highlighted to me, as other people that we're having the conversations with, and similar to what I've heard on these similar panels. There's a real rise in what our topic's about today, how people can leverage the much emerging topics of large language models and using GPT, which I have found out what GPT is now, and looking at how businesses can apply this and build it to their businesses, especially with what's already available and really getting around the hype. So, I mean, kind of going with what your question is, but I'd like to know from Walt really on obviously what you're specialized in at Expert AI, how you and your team are really making some seriously great innovations in my mind on what you're partnering with, and you've done some recent research. I'm learning a lot about it, and I'm seeing how Coca-Cola are doing things, the rise of prompt engineering, companies like PwC and Bloomberg are making their own ChatGPT. So Walt, I would say come to you and maybe give us some context. Why would you say, because you're much more involved than I am, why would you say businesses are taking this approach, and what does it mean with capabilities that are becoming available to the masses?
Yeah, thanks for that, Tom, and Marcus. You put forward a pretty broad question, right? Along the lines of, hey, anything interesting happening in technology these days, right? And I'm going to say yes. There's something very, very interesting happening in technology these days. And I say that fully recognizing that, the pace and the breadth of technology transformation that's occurred over the last 20 years has truly been extraordinary. So you kind of start off there, right? But what we're talking about now, under the broad umbrella of artificial intelligence, I think is qualitatively different. And even with the hype, there is a profound and new set of capabilities that are emerging. And I've heard thoughtful observers say that this is something like the third major platform shift that has occurred in technology. You can probably go back, and here we're talking about digital technology. Okay, so let's narrow the field a little bit. But you can go back to the widespread availability of personal computing. So that you're going back into the 1980s, 1990s, right? Then the internet platform shift, where the internet, right around the end of the 1990s, beginning in 2000, really revolutionized just revolutionize the way that we could engage, the way that we're engaging right now, right? How people play, shop, communicate, work, profoundly different, right? Things that we really could not have envisioned in 1995, enabled by this platform shift, right? The perhaps an extension of this idea of personalized computing, right? Digital technology that is easily available at the individual level is the mobile shift. So somewhere around 2010, it really began to take off. And we're now talking about, I think it's fair, another profound transformative shift, platform shift. And this is the idea of artificial intelligence that can emulate capabilities that were previously thought of as uniquely human, and can provide a level of digitally enabled capability that is pretty astonishing. And going back to the point that Tom made, what's captured everyone's imagination is this new development, and that was the introduction of Chat GPT, right? But the technology behind that goes back to 2017. So it's about 6 years old, but it's very typical in that there's an evolution where there's a technology that's introduced, and then it achieves that inflection point or that tipping point. Yeah. And typically there's some demonstration of that capability that is the aha moment where people go, oh my goodness, like, what is this? I've never seen anything like this, right? And all credit to Sam Altman and the team, because he apparently was the one who really drove OpenAI to introduce an easily accessible consumer application that revealed the potential of this underlying artificial intelligence capability, and that was ChatGPT. Okay, so that's really what I think we're all reading about and seeing in the newspapers, and when for better and for worse, right? But the level of transformation, I believe, is profound. And where there's smoke, there's fire. Even with all the hype, I think this is something that merits everyone's attention.
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely. But when it comes to these, really, really exciting developments, it's an amazing moment we're currently in the tech world. How can businesses themselves use this sort of technology to gain insights and analytics and actually help them make better decisions?
Yeah, I mean, Tom and I were talking about this, and Tom, feel free to jump in, right? Because you're an admirably practical person who's got a lot of experience with technology, and of course, nobody has ever accused technology executives about being humble and really grounded in the way they describe their technology. Typically, it's transformational. It's going to revolutionize your work, and so on and so forth, right? Kind of before we get there, though, what I'd like to do maybe is just describe the capability that's really driving this new wave of transformation, and part of the reason why it's so profound, right? So when you think about artificial intelligence, which is a useful term to the extent that it helps you clarify and organize your own thinking, right? So you say, well, what does artificial intelligence mean? And generally, it's some form of technology that emulates capabilities that was previously thought of as being uniquely reserved for human beings, right? So we don't talk about, for example, artificial transportation, right? Because planes enable you to fly, right? Because that was never a capability of human beings, right? It's just transportation. Artificial intelligence, though, is where you start to say, there were some things that we believe that were innate and unique to our own cognitive capability, right? And generally, they're complex, compound capabilities, right? So they're not discrete.
Yeah.
So, you have a camera and it can capture an image, right? But that's not object recognition, right? That's just a replication of an image. The complex and compound cognitive capability is the ability to generalize and identify in a useful way what the object is.
Yeah.
So what's really exploded is the ability of artificial intelligence to do something that we all take for granted, which is to exchange information, to interpret and create information using a form of data that we previously considered kind of uniquely ours, which is language.
Yeah.
Right? That's really the big change. That's what this new wave of artificial intelligence technology that was ushered in and brought to the popular consciousness with ChatGPT has really enabled, right? And again, the big aha is if you look over the last, call it 15 years or so, of how the enterprises use data. Typically what they're using is structured data, numerical data that you can perform mathematical operations on, where it's deterministic, right? So the output of a mathematical operation is a known and accurate quantity, right? And so it's been all around manipulating numbers for the most part, right?
Yeah.
What we're in now is this ability to treat language as a form of data and kind of replicate in really interesting ways what humans do with it. And then the aha moment, again, for businesses is a recognition, I think the fundamental one, that language as data is everywhere in their business, right? Like it's pervasive, it's ubiquitous, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the starting point for how businesses need to think about this new capability, language as data.
Yeah, I've got 2 points on that, Walt, because that's a really fascinating area, and I know how with you and the team at expert.ai, how up to speed you are with having language and interpreting that and getting the most value you can out of that. And backtracking on your earlier words in that part there, you mentioned we mentioned it with use cases of generative AI and businesses, data professionals, and leadership essentially learning a new language, right? It's quite tricky at times. I mean, I was looking at it and there's all these new avenues, and I'm myself at the moment learning German, and I know how hard it is to pick up on the context, on the accents, on the pronunciation. And there was a really funny, it was a book before last that I read with Mark Benioff, Behind the Cloud, and he said how interpreting that language to a different country. So, for example, finger licking good for KFC when they're promoting it in China literally meant eat your fingers off, which you can obviously see how that data can make a different change.
Sure.
But long story short, I'd love to know from you, Walt, do you think you're seeing businesses get the best out of this technology at the moment? And what do you think it is where we're still early days, you say 6-7 years, the world's been around billions of years. What is it that they can do, or what kind of things are you seeing to get the best out of the technology? Because I'll personally say, I don't think we are at the moment. What do you think?
No, I don't think they are. Look, the danger in this hype cycle is that a fair amount of money is going to be shoveled into a furnace, right?
Yeah.
And that's never good. And as you think about some of the more recent kind of transformations, and look, I'm a CEO, so I think it's okay for me to make fun of CEOs, right? But I think one of the pitfalls for enterprises is they get a little bit hypnotized by the technology, right? And underlying that is some fear around a loss of competitive advantage, right? That, okay, this new dynamic's out there, we need to be part of it, otherwise we're going to get left behind. And some folks are actually more thoughtful about it, and then they're thinking, well, this is something that's really core to our capability to compete and win in the domain that we're in, so we really need to get in front of it. What happens early days, though, I think is the former case more often than not, right? So, the proverbial conversation, it's 2015, and the CEO pulls his team into the room and says, fellas, we need big data, right? Yeah. I mean, this is critical. I've been reading about it, and we got to have big data. So go, right? Come back to me with your big data plan. Oh, okay, right? Well, now they will do that for sure, right? And then fast forward, it's 2018. Fellas, we need to get on the cloud. Come on, let's go. I want to see this team rally around the future of the cloud. And I'm being a little bit pointed here, right? The danger is that same kind of dynamic occurs. And look, it's complex. It's hard. It's still relatively early days. And it's easy for us to forget that, right? ChatGPT came out at the end of November last year. Right now, the underlying technology, as I said, had been around since 2017, but ChatGPT came out at the end of November. I looked at it roughly, I would say maybe 2 days after it launched, and I thought, this is a meaningful new capability that OpenAI has introduced to its previous capabilities, right?
Yeah.
I think that it's kind of falling into two camps, and we talked a little bit about this, Tom, the initial reaction. One is an immediate kind of flight to risk, where everyone's like, whoa, this looks very scary, right? There's all these elements associated with this new technology, and we need to be very, very thoughtful, right? Yeah. Now, very, very thoughtful is fine, and I agree with that. And so right away, we saw a lot of companies say, for example, do not use ChatGPT for any company information. And that's probably right. You would say that around most any application, right? That's non-trivial, okay? I think right now there's still a little bit maybe over-pronounced risk aversion, right? If you haven't adopted it yet, well, okay, nothing's going to happen. So, no need to over-index. And then, when you have letters coming out now that are saying, we believe that AI is on the order of climate change and nuclear weapons as a potential path to human extinction, and you're running let's say you're running a hospitality chain, obviously you're probably like, wow, we should stay away from that. Well, okay, I think that's a little bit overdrawn. The flip side of that, though, is the folks who are just going pell-mell in, right? Yeah. And so I think it's just that balance. And again, what I always go back to in our world, in expert.ai, I will say, we've had the .ai in our name for over 3.5 years. Okay, so we're not part of the crowd who's rushing out and now paying very high prices for domain names that end with .ai, right? But one of the things I said is the most important benchmark in artificial intelligence is ROI.
Yeah.
For a business, right? So what problems are you solving? Why is it big enough to be meaningful? And what's the right technology that will help you to solve the problems in a way that costs less than it's worth, right? Yeah. It's just kind of that simple. And again, that's where I go a little bit back to that point around language is data. And you should be thinking about how it drives the decisions, the costs, and the revenue in your business, and potentially things like risk.
Yeah.
So, Tom, short answer, right now, a huge amount of interest. I think folks are being fairly thoughtful, right? But it's still very early days.
Yeah. But you could say that they're being thoughtful, Walt, but they don't have the right strategy execution, right? You gave a great example, or strategy, and I don't know, I'll speak for myself on that point because I see it from a lot of other technologies, not just GPT and large language models, but with the cloud and what your data infrastructure looks like, or using data security. And a lot of people, like you said, Walt, there's a great example, an Adobe advert. I'm going to say it's dated maybe 8-9 years ago, and you can find it on YouTube. And it basically shows a marketer hearing a keyword, and he basically runs into his thing and changes everything. And he's just like, this is the thing, get me a targeted campaign. I want PPC ad running. I want this running. And it's about this new app that's creating massive buzz. And then they come in the next week and the person goes, you're still on that app? That's dead, man. And they're like, we've just spent all this time on this new initiative. So yeah, I'm thinking like, do you think, I'd say, you mentioned how people are asking questions and they are looking at potentially safeguarding it, and almost, I think you said like a G7 level of conversation around the safeguards. But in risk engineering and logistics, for example, how do people get that correct, or what are they? You gave an example on it. How do they get that correct? That kind of strategy or execution, maybe. Well,
yeah, I mean, you start with first principles, right? So. And again, kind of typical in the exaggerated examples I was offering, right? When there is some rush to adopt technology, that would be the first sign that I would say, hey, wait a minute, slow down, right? And the rush should be to understand the capability and the limitations of technology. That's it. Okay. So my advice in talking to any business leader would be this is meaningful. So it's not pure hype. You should pay attention. And the smart people in your business should pay attention. All right. That's kind of step one. And so I'd say it merits more scrutiny than perhaps some other technologies that have emerged, right? It wasn't too long ago, people were talking about blockchain, right? Remember, that was maybe 2 years ago, 18 months ago. Then there were some things like Web 3.0, which candidly I never understood, right?
Yeah.
And
VR.
What's that?
The metaverse, VR, which has got a new public.
Yeah, metaverse and so forth, and then in the financial world there was DeFi, right? So DeFi was somehow vaguely related to the metaverse and blockchain, so it was a perfect confluence of really ambiguous concepts, right? Yeah. And if anyone had asked me at that point, I would have said, I don't think you should spend a lot of time on that right now. Okay, with generative AI technology, or more broadly with the application of AI to language as data, I think you should pay attention, right? Now that's entirely self-serving because that's what we do, but I think it's also there's lots of data points that says, yeah, this feels different, right? So that's kind of one. Two, you have to be able to understand it on your own terms. Full stop. Okay, yeah. So if there is a point at which you get to the ragged edge of the map where there be dragons and somebody's still talking about the capability and you're like, wow, I'm not really following you, then that's not good enough. Yeah. If it can't be explained to you in terms of how your business is going to do better, then you got to keep pushing. Okay. Yeah. And don't confuse success with, hey, we've introduced a project that does something in generative, right? Generative AI, right? Yeah. So that's kind of step one. This merits your attention. Step two, understand it in terms that are clear to you in your domain.
Yeah.
Force that out of your team, right? I would say step three is be cognizant of the limitations and the risks. That's just due diligence, and that's part of the responsibility of every business leader, right? Don't over-index on it, but know what they are, right?
Yeah.
And then pretty quickly move to, well, what are some of the things that we could do in relatively short order that could help us save money, make money, serve our customers better, reduce risk, et cetera, right? And my helpful hint to a business leader is show me language data flows in your enterprise that a lot of people work with and that are important. And those would be opportunity areas, right?
Yeah. Well, it's very similar to me. I always think I can't do something or I struggle to have an opinion. I'm getting at what you're saying. Well, unless I can see something, I'm a learner that, like, I was terrible at school because I was trying to learn concepts, but as soon as you put me in a room where it's like this goes here, that goes there, I'm like, oh, bingo, like I can start seeing a flow and I can start understanding it. And I personally think what's made ChatGPT so big, and I think why it's going to make it big for small deployments and specific deployments, and it's kind of a godsend because I'd speak to people and they would start with a basic conversation of what is AI. At least GPT, once people start using it, I think that's why it's caught on. You can start using it and start understanding it, right? And you can start assessing your own risks and you can start assessing how it's going to be used in the business rather than just being told at face value where you can't be doing it. So I think it's really enable businesses to understand what kind of value add they can give, which is personally very important to me and personally opened the conversation a lot more to what people are thinking. So it's a great time to be involved in this area. So
yeah, I mean, again, I think the first blush reaction that people have, and I'd like to kind of introduce a little bit of a framework, but I think the first blush reaction that people have is this this concept of interactive natural language engagement, right? So the idea that in a conversational way, you can interact with technology, right? And that kind of natural language query. Hey, I'm thinking about going to Portugal for 10 days. I want to go to Bilbao. I want to go to Lisbon, right? I'd love to spend a little bit of time on the beach, and I want to keep the whole thing under, 2,000 pounds or something like that. Yeah. Can you help plan a bit of an itinerary? That's literally the level of structure that you can put forward, right? And then what comes back, it sounds convincing. It sounds like there's somebody who's been there, right? And they write it out for you, right? And they say, yeah, sure, here, we're happy to help, right? And that's because GPT has been trained and tuned. And the interesting thing that really the big difference between the current iteration of GPT from 3.5 forward is they recognize that completely unsupervised learning, that is just kind of hands-free, letting the models work, did not provide that level of interactivity. So they trained using humans. Okay, so just to be absolutely clear, right? And the specific technique is called reinforcement learning with human feedback. Yeah. Okay, so human beings helped guide this along. Now, I think there's something important there, which is take that as an important safety tip in almost every level of engagement that you're going to have with the technology. It needs to be human-centered.
Yeah.
Okay? But I think that's kind of the first thing. Now, the other thing is this idea around content creation, right? Where it's creating wholly new content, language that didn't exist. And I think a lot of people who played around with ChatGPT have had fun with that. Write a song in the style of Nirvana about the end of the quarter in an enterprise software company, right? And you get something back really funny, and you get it at your sales meeting, and everybody goes, "Wow, that's crazy." It's not obvious from there, though, what the immediate business applications are, right? So I would say, wow, we're onto something new again. It's relevant again. The content creation piece, I saw a really good decision tree around GPT in particular, and the other forms of what are described as large language models, which is a type of model that is a subset of a type of AI. right?
Yeah.
And the decision tree was, is it important if the output is true? If
Yeah.
yes, don't use GPT, right? If no,
Kind of cool.
yeah, hand off you go.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of an overstatement, but not much, because one of the, one of the really one of the core things about this capability is it aims to please. So it will provide you with an answer,
Mm.
and it will provide you with an answer that seems as responsive as possible. And sometimes, taking me back to my college days, some of it's made up, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I'd pause a little bit, right? And the way I would frame, and I'll stop there, Tom, because I want to make sure you and I have a chance to go back and forth here.
Yeah. But I'm loving it. So it's really getting me thinking, right? Because similar to how other people, the context is really important for me, and that's what I tell people going into any business decision, and what I tell myself. And granted, I've got a lot to learn on those areas, but I can understand someone one way, and it depends on the emotional attachment I put to it, depends on the context I put to it, depends on what I think to it. If it's a business decision, someone coming to me with a proposal or something might, because of the way they've displayed it, I might think wrong, but they might take it to someone else and they might think, wow, that's great, that's the best thing we've ever seen, or vice versa. So I would think how people capture that data, interpret it, is different. And to your point, Walt, how businesses capture data use different ways, right? They use different methods. We were saying some people combine and they capture, and they might use something like language models and knowledge graphs. Is this, I hope I'm going down the right track, but I'd like to know from your expertise and from what I've seen in other companies, is there something there that leaderships or data teams, and I hope I'm not getting you to repeat yourself, can need to know when thinking about that? Because they might be looking at it the wrong way and think, we've gone away all down this track with this hype of AI doing this module, and we're capturing the data the wrong way, or we're interpreting it the wrong way.
I don't see that as a big risk, honestly, right now. And I think that's one of the, that's been one of the perennial obstacles in the adoption of enabling digital technology, right?
Mm.
The holy grail. Well, if we can just get the data right, if we can just get the data right. And so, there's this promise of clean, uniform, real-time streaming data, right?
Yeah.
This crystal clear mountain stream that we can drink from, and it'll provide the answer to all our problems. No, it's not going to happen. Okay, ever. Yeah. So don't stop. Yeah. Right. And look, you start with an even more fundamental thing, right? Which is, as soon as you measure anything, you are already, you are changing context, right?
Yeah.
So, how you count and what you count in and of itself has a context. So the data might be perfect, but the fact is you're counting the wrong thing. And that's a business decision, right? Yeah. So how do you capture whether a customer is satisfied, right? Well, you come up with a methodology that you think is reasonably correlated, right?
Yeah.
And that may or may not be accurate. In the language world, which is where we operate, the language is there now. And there's a good chance that you have a pretty standard, through a meaningful parts of your business, you have some pretty standardized language workflows. So we work, for example, with life sciences and insurance, right? Yeah. Banking, financial services, information services, et cetera. But when you think about an insurance company, there are big processes. At the front end, their job, an insurance company's job, is to price risk. And if they price it accurately, right, then they can distribute the risk and they can make money off of that. All right.
Yeah.
So at the front end, it's assembling information, much of which is in the form of language, to understand that risk. That's one big process. And then on the back end, it's paying out against the risk that you've insured. And much of that is language, right? So you think about, say, a large company has workers' compensation insurance policy. Somebody gets injured on the job. That information is submitted to the insurance company, and that information is an accident report. And that's written up. A box fell on their head or on their foot, right? Yeah. And then there's an employment report. Is there any previous record of an injury that's similar? And it's a medical report, right? It's all language. And it goes to a person who's reading it. And then out of that, they understand it. And then they try to make a decision, right? Yeah. Those are existing workflows. There's a lot of forms. There's a lot of types of text. And you tend to know what's important because you've been doing it for a while, right? So you say, really, it comes down to these 25 things. You want to capture them in a consistent and accurate way. What AI applied to language enables you to do is to really accelerate that and to improve the consistency. Because one of the things about humans is we're inconsistent, right?
Human error.
And it's not only across teams, you've got a normal distribution of how people perform. You've got some people who are just like unbelievably good, the 10X claims adjuster, right? Where everyone's just like, wow, Susan, she's right? She just never makes a mistake.
Yeah.
And then you got some folks, well, they're newer, maybe they're not as well trained. But even the same person is subject to a lot of variability, right? And so there's lots of rules of thumb around, like, for example, when you should schedule surgery, right? Like, don't do it after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The magic hour is, between 10 and noon, something like that, right? Because that's when people tend to be at their peak efficiency, right?
Yeah.
With the introduction of AI applied to language, you can kind of raise that upper and lower control limit and say, we're going to bound it and raise it and do it much faster. And the way you do it faster is by stripping away things that aren't important and highlighting things that are, right?
Yeah. And that goes back to the point of thinking what the outcome is and what you want to get out of it. I always remember there's 2 pieces of great advice I've got so far, and one of them came from my previous employer at Capgemini, who is my manager and head of marketing, and we went with a dashboard of all the data we captured on the marketing initiatives and the campaign generation, and she said, Dom, you can always get more data. Like, there's plenty of it there that if we want to grab more of it, it's what data do we need and what specific. So when I went there, obviously being a lot younger, a bit more naive, I went thinking, oh, we've got this, I'm so good. She was just looking at me confused, thinking, but what's our outcome and what do we want to get from it? A lot of this we do not need, and we do not need to interpret at the moment. Maybe we need it later on. It's great that we've got it there. But it was a fundamental thing of always thinking, what's the primary, I'd say, to me, top 3 things that you need to know to be able to implement. And it's the same thing with large language models and GPT. And I mean, the other piece of advice from Ray Dalio, where he says, when he lost all his money and made his comeback, he said, he always asked himself, okay, I'm right, but how do I know I'm right? So really challenging again what it is with that decision and how to interpret it, following to what you're saying, well, on what might be the best decision and what might be the best methodology and what might be the best route. And I always tell people, if they're a smaller company, I don't always tell people, but I suggest it and say, just because it's a hot thing doesn't mean it's the hot thing for you at the moment. It's not necessarily something you need right now. Not saying it can't be for the future.
And that's fair, right? And maybe at this point I can introduce a little bit of the framework, right? So when we talk about GPT, that's generative pre-trained transformer, right? So that's a type of essentially neural model that is characterized by 2 things. One, it's massively large. So you'll sometimes hear large language model, and GPT is a large language model, and there's many others, right? So Anthropic has one, AI 21, Bard from Google, et cetera, right? So it's characterized, one, by the size of the model, and they really are very, very big. 500 billion parameters for a Google model. GPT-3 was 175 billion parameters. Let me just say that's big, okay? So it requires a lot of compute power, a lot of GPUs. The good people at NVIDIA are very happy about that for obvious reasons, right? Hats off to them. However, right, when you start to follow that train, which is they're really large, they're very, very complex, and they've also been trained on a lot of data, right? So that's the main, the two defining characteristics typically of large language models, right? And then you follow that train along. And this is, again, being thoughtful as a business leader, right? You say, okay, well, there's this new technology. What's different about it? Oh, okay, well, it's just a much bigger model, and it's trained on a lot more language. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, it means you need to be careful about the output, right? Because the input was very large. And it also means it's expensive. That would get my attention, right? So there's a correlation between NVIDIA's 1 trillion market cap and what these large language models cost, right? It's expensive. So now, large language models are a subset of a lot of other AI approaches. And, our point of view is we're a big fan of Occam's razor, right? Which is a little bit of advice that goes back to, I think, the 1500s, which is find the simplest solution that works.
Yeah.
Paraphrasing, right? And our view is an approach that takes all of the different AI methodologies for the strengths that they bring to bear around efficiency, explainability, cost, etc., and creates a hybrid approach, is really what is going to drive real world results, right? Yeah. I would really caution anybody who is looking at large language models or GPT as the solution to a business problem. It's going to be part of it, and it'll probably be an important part of it. But I would be really careful about anybody who said, hey, we've got it. It's this with just a large language model, right?
I'm really conscious of time, and we can talk about. I'd love to talk about this all day with you both. It's such an interesting topic. Just a little conscious of time. I mean, when it comes to what you highlighted the example earlier about healthcare use cases and some of the risks that are involved with these sort of models, data privacy, security bias. How do you juggle those sort of risks and make sure you're avoiding those while still maintaining that competitive advantage?
Well, so one of the dynamics that's probably as astonishing as the recognition of the capability of large language models, which was really prompted by GPT. So, I think one of the things that people have noted is that ChatGPT was the fastest application ever to achieve 100 million active users. So everyone was like, wow, that's incredible. Okay, fair enough. It's free, or it was. So yeah, that helps, right? And it is fun, right? But there's been in parallel another dynamic that has been, in my opinion, even more astonishing. And that is the extent to which innovation has occurred very, very rapidly in the open source community to replicate the capability of these large language models, but with much smaller models. Okay. And so if you look, the speed at which that occurred has been just breathtaking, right? And so you have models that are, order of magnitude smaller that you can run on a laptop, right? That are offering some of that same really compelling capability around natural language interactivity. Now, the reason that's relevant is that opens the door to the idea, and this is something that we saw in our own survey that we did with business leaders around how they're thinking about large language models, that you're going to move to purpose-built, domain-specific language models, where you have much more control over things like privacy, the data that's used to train it. Because to the earlier example that I gave around planning your trip to Portugal, that's nice, but if you're in healthcare or life sciences, you don't really need that. I mean, your employees might want to do it, but they can do that on their own time with ChatGPT, right? What you really want, and it's particularly important, is you want something that's domain relevant. The other piece, and this is to the idea that I offered around a hybrid approach, right, is having ground truth, right? So this is less around the privacy, and this is more around how do you have guardrails that help you to ensure that the output is accurate. Yes. And this is like non-trivial. It was just yesterday that in the US, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau came out and warned banks that AI-enabled chatbots would be held accountable for bad advice.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's non-trivial, right? Yeah. So in the life sciences domain, though, where you're thinking about how critical it is to have truly grounded information in a drug launch process, or as you're submitting information to a regulatory body for approval, language information, right? You want to make sure it is accurate. So you have to have some way of explicitly grounding that. That's the knowledge graph world that we offer and that you were speaking to, Tom, right? So we think that combination of smaller language models with the implicit knowledge that they offer, but domain directed with an explicit repository of knowledge is what's really going to add an awful lot of value in those domains.
Compounding value, I'd say, can grow, like you said, grow much more quicker. So it's an amazing world.
Yes. And where do we see the future applications of these large language models? Where do we see that going, and also what are some of the sort of ethical considerations to consider as we move forward, as the technology becomes more widely used?
Yeah, I mean, the future applications, there's a lot of really interesting perspectives emerging, and they're happening very, very quickly, right? And the fact that they're coming out right now, for example, right, which is where you can essentially take the AI capability and string together a set of instructions that really begin to emulate complex tasks.
Yeah.
Right. Not kind of point information. Right. So you hear about chain of thought prompting. Right. And the most recent one that came out was tree of thought prompting. Okay. Now, when I say recent, this is like 8 days ago or 10 days ago, maybe 12 days ago. So my guess is we're probably 4 years away from that being rolled out in a way that's super helpful, right? There's some very interesting things that are happening right now with things like coding, right? So the idea of using language models to help people code, again, I'd be a little bit thoughtful about that, because once you code it and you deploy it, and then you're trying to figure out how you ended up there, if the answer is I don't know, we got it from
you can't backtrack on that. Yeah, the legal system won't look very kindly, thinking, "Oh, I just got it out of a black box." Don't know where. There we
Good
go.
luck, right? Like, who did that? And you go, you mean what did that? So, Marcus, what I would say is, I wouldn't worry a whole lot about what's going to be available in 3 or 4 years. I'd focus in on what can we do in the next 12 months that can help us make or save money. And again, I would just go back and say, where is language important? And two things to look at, right? Where is there complex language a relatively high volume of it, and a meaningful number of trained people working with it in a fairly standard way. I'll make it even simpler. Show me 50 people in my business who are treating language data in more or less the same fashion, day in and day out, as part of their job, and cost more than $70,000 a year. Okay, there you go. Start looking there, because there's a good chunk. And my guess is all you'd have to do is ask them and say, in your job, what would make it 40% easier? And they'd say, well, gosh, I have to wade through 60% of this data. It's not even relevant. And I'd say, oh, I think I can help there, right? I can use AI to identify non-critical data and suppress it, so you won't even see it. And they'll say, thank you, because it was a pain in the neck, right? So, that's the kind of thing that I would be looking at. I would go beyond this idea of kind of the immediate focus that a lot of companies have of chatbot and conversational, right? I would absolutely go beyond that. And I'd say, where are these complex volume and value intersections? And then the other one would be, where is there a signal in the noise that's valuable, but the volume is so high that you can't have people read it, so it's not being captured, right? So those would be the two use cases. Focus in on those, put some smart people to work in your team. I don't think it'll take a long time for them to figure out where the opportunity is. And then talk to, the other thing I'd say is don't immediately decide you're going to build it yourself. That is, don't try this at home.
Right? I'll personally say from experience, that's one of the worst decisions I've personally made at times, and can be very costly. And also, back to your point, Walt, to finish on that point, I'd say look at your value chain. I mean, people want to instantly jump to it and think, if I could see processes and what take a business to the next stage, right, and better processes, better optimization, and that's how they get better. Usually, when I've personally seen, that's what I personally put it down to. And if you can see where in that thread of the business, not just deploying something such as a chatbot or saying it is, and really grilling, okay, where are we losing value in our pipeline? And that might be a pipeline for any, you touched on with the different action points markers. That might be your marketing, that might be your finances and procurement, that might be your areas of go to sales or go to market, depending on how big your business might fall under the same category, or looking at your after sales support and really thinking in those threads of key areas, where do I need to be a master and where's the value being missed?
Yeah, I probably shouldn't say this as a technology executive, but when you think about something like customer service, right? And you say, we're going to invest 20 million in generative AI, interactive customer service. Okay, I'm just throwing that out there, right? And you're an airline, okay? And because it's going to move the needle in terms of customer satisfaction. If you were to say, well, wait a minute, why don't you take that 20 million and give every passenger a nice little box of chocolate right when they're getting off the plane? See what that does. Right? That might actually be like one of the things that moves the needle. I actually had a customer service experience on an airline, and it was this little thing that the flight attendant provided to me. I'd spilled something on my shirt, and she had a little stain remover packet, right? And I was like, brilliant. And now that's an investment, right? Now, that said, language is everywhere in your enterprise. There's really expensive, meaningful processes that you can address right now. We're really good at it. Give us a call. All right. So, the chocolate industry is on their own. They can do whatever they want.
Fantastic. Oh, brilliant. Well, Walt and Tom, I'm afraid that's about all we've got time for. It's been a fantastic conversation. So thank you both for joining us on Tech Live. Real pleasure speaking to you.
Marcus, enjoyed it thoroughly. Tom, as always, you're fun to be with. Thanks so much.
You too,
Thanks
buddy.
to you both.
Appreciate it,
Thanks to you
Marcus.
both.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone.
Thank you. Thanks
Bye-bye.
both.